On the second morning, the voice calling my dad's name was my dad's voice, but my dad was sitting right next to me. We drove up to Elk County the Thursday before the first Saturday of Pennsylvania rifle season. My dad, Gary, had been hunting that same stretch of state forest since he was 19. I was 26. We'd done this every year since I was old enough to hold a rifle. 4 hours up Route 219 past the Flying J outside of Brockway, where we always stopped for bad coffee and worse egg sandwiches. Same order, same booth, same jokes. My dad paid every time. We had a camper parked on 63 acres of private ground. A buddy's uncle owned it. It backed up against about 12,000 acres of public forest. We pulled the Silverado in Thursday night, cut wood, ate chili out of the pot, and were in bed by 9. Temperature was already in the mid-20s. I had to run the propane heater twice before the camper got bearable. Saturday morning we were up at 4. My dad hunts with a Savage 110 he's had since 1991. I carry a Ruger American in .308. We'd scouted 2 stands in October. His was about a quarter-mile northeast of camp. Mine was another 200 yards beyond that, up a hill that dropped into a drainage where deer moved in the mornings. We split at the fork in the logging road, same as always, and I climbed into my stand alone in the dark. Opening day was quiet, good quiet. I saw 3 does and a forkhorn I let walk. My dad saw nothing. We met at camp around noon, ate, napped, nothing to tell. The second morning is when it started. We split at the fork again around 5, still dark. I got into my stand, clipped my safety harness. My dad's stand was behind me and to the left, maybe 250 yards through the timber. On still mornings, I could hear him settle in, the squeak of the metal when he shifted his weight. I heard the stand creak before first light. That was normal. What came about 20 minutes later was not. Something was moving through the brush below the hill, not a deer. The sound was wrong. It was a 2-beat step, heel-toe, like a person walking careful, trying to be quiet, not quite managing it. Leaves and frozen ground, that dry crunch that carries farther than it should in cold air. It was moving slowly, the kind of pace that isn't going anywhere so much as it is arriving. I rode it off. Other hunters pushed into the public ground sometimes. I held still. Then I heard my dad's voice. Not similar to my dad's voice, his voice. The exact register, the flat Western Pennsylvania vowels, the way he swallows the end of words. I have listened to that voice my entire life. "Hey, Joel." It came from my left and below, from the direction of the drainage, maybe 80 yards out. I didn't answer. Something about it made me not answer. It wasn't wrong the way a bad impression is wrong. It wasn't an obvious fake. It was more that it was too clean, no breath behind it, no effort. The way a recording sounds slightly different from a room a person is actually standing in. I looked back over my left shoulder toward my dad's stand. I couldn't see him in the dark, but I could see the shape of the tree he was in. Then I heard his stand creak as he shifted. He was there in his stand, 250 yards behind me. The voice from the drainage said it again. "Hey, Joel." Same tone, same flat vowels, not a question, not urgent, like he was just letting me know he was there. I did not move. The brush sound stopped. Whatever made it went still. I sat there with my heart going and watched legal shooting light come up over the hill. I tried to talk myself into a reason for it. Another hunter who sounded like him. Sound bouncing off the drainage in the cold. I ran through the list for the better part of 2 hours, none of it fully held together. When we met at the fork at noon, I told my dad what I heard. He was quiet for a second, then he said, "What direction?" I pointed toward the drainage. He didn't say anything after that, just nodded and started walking back toward camp. We went out again the next morning. Third day, I almost didn't. My dad didn't say anything about staying in, so I didn't either. I was in my stand by 5:15, full dark, no moon, temperature around 22 degrees. The cold was the kind that settles into your joints and stays. I could smell frozen mud and the rot of leaves at the bottom of the drainage. And underneath that, something else I couldn't place, faint, almost sweet. Wrong the way meat left out too long is wrong before it's obviously spoiled. I told myself it was a gut pile from another hunter's kill somewhere uphill. I kept telling myself that. I had my Ruger across my lap, and I was watching the drainage below. Around 6, something stepped out of the tree line at the far edge of the drainage. I thought it was a deer. I got the rifle up. It wasn't a deer. It was tall, too tall, standing straight up. It didn't move the way a person moves after they've stopped walking. No settle, no shift of weight. It just stopped like a post. I held the scope on it. My hands were steady. I've been hunting long enough that I don't shake. I could not see a face. I could not see what it was wearing. I could only see the shape of it against the gray sky over the drainage. 2 arms, a head, standing maybe 6 feet, maybe more. It had been below zero wind chill all morning. I could see my own breath fogging in the scope light. I watched for its breath. I watched for any vapor rising from it at all. There was none. It was looking up at me. I don't know how I knew that. There was no face I could make out, but I knew the way you know when someone has walked into a room behind you before you hear them move. Something directional, something certain. The silence stretched, no wind, no birds, nothing in the drainage moved. The whole bottom of that hill had gone completely still, not ordinary quiet, something else. It felt like held breath. Then it spoke. You see anything? My dad's voice, word for word what he says every morning when we meet at the fork. It was standing directly below my stand, maybe 15 feet out. Somewhere in the time I'd been watching it through the scope, it had crossed 200 yards of open drainage without me seeing it move. It was just there, that close. I did not answer, I did not move. I sat in that stand and I watched it. It stood there in the drainage. After what felt like 4 or 5 minutes, it stepped back into the tree line and was gone. No sound, no crashing brush, it just stepped back and disappeared. I waited 10 minutes, I counted them on my watch. Then I climbed down, slow, one rung at a time. I kept the rifle in my hand, not on my back. I did not use my flashlight. I walked toward my dad's stand using the shape of the logging road through the trees. His stand was empty. I went cold. Then I heard the creak of his boots on the frozen ground about 30 yards out. He was already walking toward me. We didn't talk. I fell into step next to him, and we walked the logging road back to camp without a word. When we got to the Silverado, I put my rifle in the back seat, and he put his in the case. Finally, he said, "We're going home." I said, "Okay." We broke camp in 40 minutes, didn't pack clean, just packed. We stopped at nothing on the way out. Not even the Flying J. My dad drove the whole 4 hours with both hands on the wheel. I watched him from the passenger seat for most of that drive. He kept his eyes on the road and his jaw set the way he gets when he's decided something. He didn't turn the radio on once. The next weekend we went back to pick up the camper. We brought my Uncle Dennis along. He's 68 and he's been hunting Elk County most of his life. While we were hitching up, I told him what happened. He didn't laugh. He didn't look at me like I was putting him on. He said he'd heard of it, said there was a name some of the older hunters used, a local name, but he didn't repeat it. Said when he was about 30, he'd been hunting a ridge maybe 6 miles north of our camp with 2 other men. One of them walked back to the truck at midday. About an hour later, the other 2 heard him calling from the tree line. They found him at the truck. He'd been there since noon. Nobody ever figured out who had been calling. I asked a game warden about it once, not directly. I asked if he'd ever had reports of unusual activity in that section of state forest. Hikers, trespassers, anything like that. He looked at me for a second, then he said, "Which section?" I told him the road we came in on, the Old Forks Township logging road off Route 555. He wrote something in his notebook, didn't show me what, said he'd look into it. That was 2 years ago. I never heard back from him. My dad doesn't talk about it, not once since that drive home. I've brought it up twice. Both times he changed the subject so smoothly I almost didn't notice he'd done it. He's not a man who spooks easily. He hit a black bear with his truck on Route 219 in 2009 and got out to check the damage before he called it in. Whatever he saw or heard those 2 mornings, he decided a long time ago to put it somewhere he doesn't open. I still hunt. I can't not hunt. It's too much of who I am, who we are together. We just don't use those stands anymore. Well, the PA clicked on at 10:17 and the voice wasn't Mr. Cahill's. That was the first thing wrong, just that, a voice where the wrong voice should have been. Mr. Cahill had been our principal for 11 years. I knew his voice the way you know a song you've heard too many times. Low, unhurried, he always cleared his throat before he started. The voice on the PA that Tuesday morning was flatter, younger maybe. It said the right words in the right order, but it wasn't him. My name is Joel. I was 17, junior year at Harwick High School in rural central Pennsylvania. Small district, the whole K-12 in one brick building off Route 44, about 800 kids, the kind of place where everyone knows which truck belongs to which teacher. I was sitting 3rd row from the door in AP Chemistry when it happened, first week of November. The heat in that wing had been running high all morning, dry and close, and I was already a little drowsy before any of it started. The announcement said, "Attention staff and students, this is a code yellow. Please secure your classrooms and remain calm." Code yellow meant a threat in the surrounding area, not on school grounds. Stay put, lock up, wait for all clear. We drilled it twice a year since middle school, and Mr. Cahill always made the call, always. Mrs. Delaney, our chemistry teacher, was already moving to the door. I raised my hand, force of habit, I guess. She didn't look at me. She pulled the door shut, turned the lock, and then did something I'd never seen a teacher do in a drill. She closed the blind on the door window without looking into the hallway first. Every protocol I'd ever been taught said you check the hall before you seal the room. She just reached up and pulled the cord. Then she turned and told us to move to the back wall and sit on the floor. Her voice was completely level. That's what felt wrong about it. Not scared, not urgent, just level. We all moved, nobody argued. There's something about a certain tone of voice that bypasses everything else. 22 juniors shuffled to the back of the room and sat down on the tile floor between the lab benches. I sat next to my friend Marcus. He leaned over and said, "Did that sound like Cahill to you?" I shook my head. He pulled out his phone. We weren't supposed to. Mrs. Delaney saw him do it and said nothing. The hallway outside was quiet for about 4 minutes, I counted. Then I heard a walkie-talkie squawk somewhere down the corridor toward the gym. One burst of static, then nothing. The fluorescent light above the nearest lab bench was buzzing the way they do when the ballast is going, and that sound felt much louder than it should have. I was aware of the cold tile through my jeans, the smell of the room. Sulfur and acetone from whatever we'd been doing earlier, and underneath that the dry metallic smell of the heating vents. Small things, the kind of things your brain catalogs when it knows something is wrong and doesn't know what else to do. Marcus showed me his screen. His mom had texted him. It said, "Are you okay? I'm hearing something is going on at the school." This was 10:22, 5 minutes since the lockdown. His mom lived 20 minutes away. The school hadn't contacted any parents yet. There hadn't been time. I stared at that message, then I looked at Mrs. Delaney. She was standing by the whiteboard with her arms crossed. She wasn't looking at us. She was looking at the door, not the window, the door itself, like she was listening through it. Someone's phone buzzed across the room, then another. A girl named Priya checked hers and went pale. She turned it face down on the floor without a word. I never found out what her message said. I never asked. About 6 minutes in, we heard footsteps in the hallway, not running, slow and even, like someone walking a familiar route. They went past our door and continued toward the science wing. Then they stopped. Then they came back. They stopped outside our door. All 22 of us were looking at that closed blind. Nobody moved. The footsteps didn't move either. I started counting seconds in my head and lost count somewhere around 12. The buzzing light, the dry heat from the vents. Someone near me was breathing faster than they should have been and trying not to let it show. Whatever was on the other side of that hollow core door wasn't announcing itself. It wasn't moving on. 30 seconds of that feels much longer than it sounds. Mrs. Delaney put one finger to her lips. She didn't look scared. She looked focused in a way I'd never seen from her before. The footsteps started again after maybe 30 seconds. They went back toward the main corridor and faded out. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Around the 15-minute mark, Marcus nudged me. He pointed across the room to a kid named Derek Sousa. Derek was a junior like us. I didn't know him well. He sat up front normally. Now he was in the back corner with the rest of us, knees up, head down. He was crying, not loudly, just sitting there with tears running down his face. Marcus mouthed something at me. It took me a second to read it. He mouthed he knew. I didn't understand that yet. At the 20-minute mark, the PA clicked back on. The same voice, not Cahill, it said, "This is a reminder to all staff, please confirm room occupancy via the check-in system." That wasn't a code yellow step. I knew every step. There was no check-in system for yellow. That was code red protocol. Mrs. Delaney walked to her desk and picked up the classroom phone. She dialed with her back to us. She spoke quietly for about 45 seconds. I caught 2 words, confirmed and west side. She hung up. She came back to the front. She lifted 2 heavy lab stools off the nearest bench and carried them to the door. She wedged them under the handle. She never explained why. No one asked. I think we all understood that asking would make it more real. The next 20 minutes were the longest I've ever spent inside a building. We sat on the floor. A few people cried quietly. A couple of kids had their eyes closed. Marcus kept refreshing his messages. His mom had sent 2 more. One said she was driving to the school. He texted her back and told her to stay away. She didn't respond. Then we heard it. Down the hall toward the main entrance, maybe 60 or 70 feet, a door handle being tested. Fast, back and forth, back and forth. A handle with a chain lock on the other side makes a specific sound when someone works against it. A short metallic rattle, not quite a rattle, not quite a knock. That's exactly what I heard. Then a flat impact against a door, not a kick, not a knock, just a single hard hit, like someone's palm or shoulder. Then silence. The silence was worse. My ears were straining so hard I could hear my own pulse. Every person in that room was holding their breath in the same direction. All of us tilted slightly toward that wall, toward the main entrance, waiting. Then the flat sound of sneakers on tile, moving fast, moving away from us. Mrs. Delaney was already at the stools, pressing them harder into the door. Her jaw was set. She didn't look at us. That was the moment I knew. Whatever was happening in that building, it was not a threat in the surrounding area. It was already inside. We sat there for another 35 minutes. The PA never came on again. No police announcement, no all clear, nothing. At some point I heard voices in the hallway, multiple people, low and clipped. I heard the word clear. Then another voice said it further down the corridor, then another. Mrs. Delaney looked through the blind for a long time before she touched those stools. Two officers in tactical vests were standing in the hall. One of them said the building was secure. He told us to leave our bags and walk single file to the football field on the east side. We did. In the parking lot, 3 Chevy Tahoes with county sheriff markings were angled across the bus lane, 2 state police cruisers, and 1 gray Chrysler minivan with no markings, parked sideways on the grass near the gym entrance. I don't know whose it was, I never found out. We stood on the football field for an hour and 40 minutes. We were not told anything. Parents picked kids up from a checkpoint on Route 44 about a quarter mile from the building. The school put out a statement at 1:15 that afternoon. It said there had been a security incident, that an unauthorized individual had been located and removed from the campus. No students or staff were injured. The matter had been turned over to the county sheriff's office. That was the whole statement. The local paper ran a short piece the next morning. Police had responded to a report of a trespasser at Harwick High. No name, no description, no further details. I looked for more, there wasn't any. Derek Sousa wasn't in school the next day, or the day after. He came back the following Monday and never talked about it. By December he'd transferred to the cyber school program and stopped coming in at all. I never saw him eat lunch with the same group again. I don't know what Marcus meant when he mouthed he knew. I've thought about it a lot. I never asked Derek. I'm not sure if I was afraid of the answer or afraid of no answer at all. What I know is this, the voice on the PA was not Mr. Cahill. The district never explained who made that announcement, or why the check-in prompt didn't match any drill protocol we'd ever been given. Mrs. Delaney retired at the end of that school year. I heard she moved out of state. Mr. Cahill came back the next day. He stood at the front of the building and shook hands with every kid who walked in. He was smiling. When I passed him, I looked him in the eye and he nodded like he was measuring something. I nodded back and went inside. I still flinch when a PA clicks on. Well, on the second morning, the voice that called my dad's name was my dad's voice, and my dad was sitting right next to me. My name is Cal. I've hunted deer in western Pennsylvania since I was 14. My dad, Ray, started taking me out to Clearfield County before I could hold a rifle steady. By the time I was 26, we had a routine so worn in it felt like a religion. First week of rifle season. His buddy Pete's property off Route 879. A 2-track logging road back to a wall tent with a wood stove inside. We'd stop at the Sheets in Phillipsburg on the way up, coffee, egg sandwiches, same order every year. I don't think we ever talked about changing it. That season I was carrying a Remington 700 in 30-06. Dad had a Browning Ob 3 he'd picked up the previous spring. We had 2 stands on the property. His was a ladder stand about 40 yards inside the east wood line. Mine was a hang-on stand I'd put up 3 Saturdays before season, maybe 200 yards north of his, overlooking a creek bottom where we'd found rubs every year. First morning went without a note out of place. Cold, clear, little wind from the northwest. I saw 2 Does It Legal light and let them walk. Dad saw nothing. We came back to Camp 8, rested through midday. Standard. The first thing that bothered me was the boot prints. I found them on the second morning before first light, working my way to my stand. My headlamp caught them at the base of the tree, 2 clear prints in the soft mud right where I always set my climbing sticks. They were fresh, the mud hadn't settled back, but they didn't match my boots. The tread was different, a big lug pattern, wider than mine, and they pointed away from the tree, like someone had been standing there and turned to walk back into the dark. I looked out into the trees, nothing moved. The beam caught maybe 30 feet of timber before the black swallowed it. I stood there long enough that my breath started fogging in the light. The woods smelled like wet leaves and cold creek water the way they always do that time of year, but there was something else underneath it, something organic and close, like the smell of a warm body standing in cold air. I told myself it was a deer that had moved off. I told myself that for a while. I climbed up anyway. First light came slow that morning. Around 7, I gave one short turn on my Primo's can call, a doe bleat, then I waited. Something answered from the north. Not a deer, the sound was close to right, but not right. Doe bleats have a specific quality, a short nasal note that rises slightly at the end. This was flatter, a little too long, like someone had heard a bleat once and was working from memory. There was a pause after it, the way there is when something is listening for a response rather than just passing through. I sat with it. 15 minutes went by. I didn't call again. I didn't mention any of it to my dad that afternoon. I wasn't sure what I would even say. The second morning is where it started in earnest. We were sitting together in his ladder stand. We did that sometimes on slow mornings just for the company. It was around 6:15, not yet legal light. We were both quiet, watching the east wood line go from black to gray. Then I heard my dad's voice. From below and to the left, maybe 30 yards out in the trees in the dark. It said his name, Ray, clear as a conversation. His exact voice, the slight flatness in the vowel, the way he drops the end of a word when he's not projecting. Not a yell, not a whisper, just the way you'd say someone's name to get their attention across a room. I turned and looked at my dad. He was right there. He hadn't said anything. He was looking at me with his mouth slightly open. We both looked back into the trees. Nothing. The woods had gone completely still. No wind, no branch movement, no small animals working through the leaves. Whatever sound there had been before that moment, and there's always sound in the woods, even at rest, had stopped. My dad's hand found my arm. He gripped it once hard and held on. We sat still for a long time. After legal light came and we could see, he whispered that he'd heard it too. He said it hadn't sounded like an echo. I didn't disagree. I also didn't tell him about the boot prints or the bad call answer from the day before. I was already connecting them. I didn't want to say it out loud. We hunted the morning out. Neither of us said much. That afternoon I was back in my hang-on stand by 2 o'clock. The weather had shifted. The wind dropped out completely. The sky went the color of old pewter. The temperature had actually climbed, which felt wrong. It was November in Clearfield County. We should have been dropping toward the 20s. Instead, the air felt thick and pressurized, like the stillness before a summer storm, heavy, like something was holding its breath. Around 3:30, I heard footsteps in the leaves below me. I looked down expecting a deer. The movement was deliberate and it stopped at the base of my tree. I couldn't see anything. The angle was wrong and the light was fading fast, but something was standing there. I could hear it breathing, slow and even. Not panicked the way a deer gets when it catches your scent, just steady, measured, the breathing of something that was not alarmed, not passing through, not lost, just standing beneath me in the gray afternoon, taking its time. I stayed completely still for what felt like 5 minutes. My hands had gone cold inside my gloves in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. I kept my eyes on the ground below me. I did not move. I did not make a sound. And the thing at the base of my tree breathed in and out like it had nowhere else to be. Then it moved off to the north, toward my dad's stand. I pulled out my phone and texted him, "You okay?" No question mark. I wasn't sure I wanted him making noise. He texted back fast, "Yeah, why?" "Something moved your way, stay put." I sat another 30 minutes and climbed down while there was still enough light to see. I walked straight to his stand. We came down together and walked the 2-track back to camp side by side, neither of us talking until we were inside with the stove going. Then he told me what had happened on his end. At the same time I'd heard the footsteps below me, he'd heard my voice. His exact words, it said something, it used your name, it said, "Cal, get down from there, same as you'd sound." He looked all around his stand, nothing visible. And then he said the sound of my voice had moved. It tracked north along the tree line, past his stand, and kept going. Something had passed between us, moving through the dark below our stands, using our voices. That's when I knew it wasn't a hunter. Hunters don't do that. No one mimics a voice through 200 yards of woods to move between tree stands. There's no reason for it. There's no explanation that fits. A person doesn't walk through the Pennsylvania woods in November making other people's voices come out of their mouth. I knew it, my dad knew it. We sat with the stove clicking between us and didn't find a single rational word for it. He said, "We're going in the morning." I said, "Yeah." We packed that night, slow, methodical. You learn to be deliberate in the dark out there. We kept the tent lit and the stove going until we were ready to load out, then killed the light and carried the gear to his F-250 in 2 trips. He drove the logging road out to Route 879 without headlights until we hit the county line. He turned them on at the main road. We didn't stop until we were back through Phillipsburg, and even then only because I needed gas. I went inside the sheets and paid cash, habit. Neither of us slept that night. The next day we drove out to Pete's place to return the key. I wasn't going to explain why we'd cut the trip short. but Pete is in his 70s, has owned that land since the 1980s. When I told him we'd heard things I couldn't explain, he didn't laugh. He sat back in his kitchen chair and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he told us that in the early 90s, 3 different hunters across 2 seasons had come off that ridge saying the same kind of thing. One of them was his own brother-in-law, that the woods up there would sometimes sound like people you knew, that his brother-in-law had heard his wife's voice on a Tuesday morning calling him in for breakfast. The nearest house was 4 miles down the road. Pete had called the county game warden that winter. The warden walked the property, found nothing, but Pete said the warden had gone quiet at one point when Pete described the voice mimicry, hadn't asked a follow-up question, just wrote something in his notebook and moved on. He knew what it was, Pete said. He just didn't have a name for it he was willing to use on official paper. Pete didn't push us to come back the following season. He said the land was always available, but he didn't push. I've thought about those 2 days a lot since then. I've tried to build a version of events that makes sense, an acoustical quirk in that creek bottom, 2 hunters somehow hearing each other's voices echo between stands, an animal no one has documented doing something no one has seen. None of it holds up. My dad's voice came from below and to the left. My dad was sitting beside me in the stand. It said his name the way he says it. It knew who to call. We still hunt every year, my dad and me. Same first week of rifle season. Same sheets stop on the way out. We just don't hunt that ridge anymore.